Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Jennifer Williams and I am 34 years old. I've been a park ranger at Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 12 years. This happened during the fall of 2023, when the missing person case of Sarah Chen turned into something that still haunts me. The call came in at 4:47 p.m. on October 15th, just as the autumn sun was beginning its early descent behind the ridge lines. I was finishing paperwork at the Elkmont station, when dispatch crackled through my radio with the familiar weight of urgency that every ranger knows too well. Unit 47, we have a missing person report. 26-year-old female Sarah Chen failed to return from a day hike on the Appalachian Trail. Last seen this morning at the Newfound Gap parking area around 8 a.m. I grabbed my pack and keyed the radio. Unit 47 responding. Any additional details on intended route or experience level? Subject is described as an experienced hiker from Nashville. Plan to hike the Charlie's Bunyan Trail and return before dark. Vehicle still in parking area, Tennessee plates. The dispatcher's voice carried that careful neutrality that comes from years of hoping for the best, while preparing for the worst. The October air bit at my cheeks as I loaded my gear into the patrol vehicle. 12 years in these mountains had taught me that fall was the most dangerous season for hikers. The days shortened rapidly, temperatures dropped without warning, and the beauty of the changing leaves lured people deeper into the wilderness than their experience could safely take them. Sarah Chen was about to become another statistic unless we found her fast. I radioed for backup and was assigned Marcus Reed, a rookie ranger who'd transferred from Yellowstone just 2 months prior. He met me at the Newfound Gap trailhead as the last tourist cars were pulling out, their occupants eager to return to warm dinners and soft beds. Marcus looked nervous, the kind of nervous that comes from knowing these mountains don't forgive mistakes. "What's the protocol, Williams?" he asked, adjusting his headlamp even though we still had maybe 40 minutes of daylight left. "We follow standard search patterns, but we move fast. Temperatures dropping to 38 degrees tonight, and if she's injured or lost..." I didn't finish the sentence. We both knew what happened to people who spent October nights in these mountains without proper gear. The Charlie's Bunyan Trail stretched ahead of us, a deceptively moderate hike that could turn deadly in the wrong conditions. The path was carpeted with fallen leaves that crunched underfoot with each step, releasing the rich, loamy scent of decomposition that defined autumn in the Smokies. Above us, bare branches created a skeletal canopy against the darkening sky. We made good time for the first 2 miles, calling Sarah's name every few hundred yards and checking the obvious places where someone might take shelter or rest. Marcus proved competent despite his nerves, methodically sweeping his flashlight beam across the underbrush and maintaining proper radio contact with base. It was at mile marker 2.8 that we found the first sign. Sarah's water bottle lay beside the trail, half buried under a pile of yellow poplar leaves. The bottle was expensive, one of those insulated steel models that serious hikers preferred. But something was wrong with its placement. The leaves covering it were too deliberately arranged, too neat, as if someone had carefully hidden it and then partially revealed it again. "That's not how you lose a water bottle," Marcus observed, voicing my own thoughts. I photographed the scene with my camera, noting the GPS coordinates. "Sarah Chen, if you can hear us, please respond." My voice echoed off the nearby rock faces, but only silence answered back. We continued up the trail, but the wrongness of that water bottle gnawed at me. In 12 years, I'd found hundreds of lost items on these trails. They had a certain randomness to their placement, dropped during a stumble, forgotten during a rest stop, blown from an open pack. This felt staged. The temperature was dropping faster than the weather service had predicted. Our breath now formed visible clouds, and frost was beginning to gather on the exposed rocks. I checked my watch. 6:15 p.m. We had maybe 15 minutes of usable daylight left. "Base, Unit 47, I called into my radio. "We're approaching Charlie's Bunyan. Found subject's water bottle at trail marker 2.8, but no sign of the subject. Requesting extension of search time and additional units." Static answered me. "Base, Unit 47, do you copy?" More static, punctuated by a sound that might have been a voice but was too distorted to understand. Marcus looked at me with concern. Radio troubles? Probably just the ridge interfering with signal. But I'd worked these mountains long enough to know which areas had communication problems, and this wasn't one of them. We pressed on, now relying on our headlamps as full darkness settled over the forest. The beam of my light cut through the growing mist that was rising from the valleys below. Each step forward felt heavier, as if the mountain itself was resisting our presence. That's when we heard the voice. Help. Please. The words drifted through the trees from somewhere ahead and to our left off the main trail. The voice was female, weak, exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd been lost in the cold for hours. Sarah? Sarah Chen? I called back, already moving toward the sound. Here. I'm here. Marcus and I exchanged glances and began picking our way through the underbrush toward the voice. The forest floor was treacherous in the dark, covered with slick leaves that concealed rocks and fallen logs. More than once I had to grab onto Marcus's pack to keep from falling. Keep calling out, Sarah, we're coming to you. Here. The voice seemed closer now, but something about its tone made my skin crawl. There was a flatness to it, an absence of the relief and emotion you'd expect from someone being rescued. We found her sitting against a large oak tree about 50 yards off the trail, exactly where the voice had been coming from. At first glance, everything looked normal. Sarah Chen matched her description. Asian American, medium build, wearing the hiking clothes described in the missing person report. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she wore the same North Face jacket mentioned by the person who'd reported her missing. But as my headlamp beam settled on her face, every instinct I'd developed in 12 years of wilderness work started screaming warnings. Sarah Chen sat perfectly still. Too still. Her eyes reflected the light like an animal's, and her skin had a waxy, translucent quality that didn't look quite right. Most unsettling was her posture. Upright, alert, as if she'd been sitting there comfortably rather than huddling for warmth after hours lost in the cold. Sarah? I approached cautiously. Are you injured? Can you tell me what happened? She turned her head toward me with a motion that was too smooth, too controlled. When she spoke, her voice had that same flat quality I'd heard calling for help. I got lost. I've been sitting here waiting. Marcus moved around to her other side, his hand resting unconsciously on his radio. How long have you been here, ma'am? Are you hurt at all? I don't know how long. Sarah's eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made him step back. Time moves differently here. The wrongness of the situation was overwhelming now. Sarah should have been hypothermic, confused, emotional. Instead, she sat like a statue, answering our questions with the mechanical precision of someone reciting lines. And there was something else, a smell in the air that hadn't been there before, sweet and cloying, like meat left too long in the sun. We need to get you back to the trailhead, I said, extending my hand to help her up. Can you walk? Sarah looked at my outstretched hand for a long moment, then smiled. It was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. Her lips pulled back to reveal teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. The smile went on too long, stretching her face in ways that shouldn't have been possible. I can walk, she said. I can do many things now. She stood without using my hand, rising in one fluid motion that defied human biomechanics. No one gets up from sitting on cold ground after hours without some stiffness, some visible effort. Sarah Chen moved like she was made of liquid. Marcus grabbed my arm. Williams, he whispered urgently. Something's wrong here. I nodded, backing away slowly. Sarah, we're going to call for a medical evacuation. Just stay right there. But Sarah was already moving, not toward the trail as expected, but parallel to it, heading deeper into the forest. Her gait was all wrong, too long, too smooth, like she was gliding rather than walking. Where are you going? I called after her. The trail is this way. She stopped and turned back to us, and in the glow of our headlamps I saw that her face had changed. The features were still recognizably Sarah Chen's, but they seemed to shift and flow as if her skin was made of water. Come with me, she said, and now her voice carried harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't produce. I want to show you something wonderful. Every alarm bell in my head was ringing now. I keyed my radio desperately. Base Unit 47, we have found the subject but need immediate medical assistance and backup. Something is seriously wrong here. Static answered, but underneath it, I could swear I heard laughter. The radio doesn't work here anymore, Sarah said, though she was now a good 30 yards away. Her voice carried perfectly through the forest air, as clear as if she were standing next to us. Nothing works the way it should here. This is a special place. Marcus had drawn his sidearm, though I wasn't sure what good it would do against whatever Sarah Chen had become. We need to get out of here, he said, his voice tight with fear. I couldn't agree more. I started backing toward the trail, but Sarah was already moving again, circling us with predatory grace. You can't leave yet, she said, and now there were multiple voices speaking in unison, all coming from her throat. I'm still hungry. It's been so long since rangers came to visit. The thing wearing Sarah Chen's face smiled again, and this time I could see that her teeth had changed completely. They were needle-sharp and seemed to go all the way back into her throat. Her eyes had gone completely black, reflecting our headlamp beams like pools of oil. Run, I whispered to Marcus. Back to the trail. Now. We crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at our faces in packs. Behind us, something that had once been Sarah Chen was laughing, and the sound followed us with supernatural persistence. No matter how far we ran, it seemed to be right behind us, gaining ground. I risked a glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. The thing was no longer trying to maintain Sarah's appearance. It moved through the forest on limbs that bent in impossible ways, sometimes running on 2 legs, sometimes 4, sometimes appearing to flow between the trees like smoke. Its face was a constantly shifting mass of features, sometimes Sarah's, sometimes belonging to people I didn't recognize, sometimes not human at all. We burst back onto the main trail and kept running downhill toward the parking area. My lungs burned in the cold air and my legs were shaking from a combination of exertion and terror. Marcus was right behind me, no longer the nervous rookie but a professional focused on survival. What the hell was that thing? He gasped as we ran. I don't know. And I didn't want to know. Some knowledge was too dangerous for the human mind to process. The laughter followed us all the way down the mountain, sometimes close enough that I could feel breath on the back of my neck, sometimes distant enough to be mistaken for wind through the trees. When we finally reached the parking area, I was surprised to find Sarah Chen's car exactly where it had been reported, keys still inside. But sitting on the hood was Sarah's driver's license and hiking permit, arranged neatly side by side. They hadn't been there when we'd started our search. Marcus and I sat in my patrol vehicle with the doors locked, shaking and trying to process what we'd experienced. I tried the radio again and was relieved when dispatch answered immediately. Base Unit 47. We've returned to Newfound Gap. The missing person case has complications. We need to speak with the supervisor immediately. Copy that, Unit 47. Supervisor Matthews is en route to your location. While we waited, I studied the driver's license through the windshield. The photo showed Sarah Chen as she appeared in life, smiling, normal, human. But as I watched, the features in the photo seemed to shift and change, morphing into the horrible thing we'd encountered in the forest. Marcus saw it too. That's not possible, he whispered. None of this is possible. Supervisor Matthews arrived 20 minutes later, along with a full search and rescue team. I gave him the abbreviated version of our encounter, leaving out the supernatural elements and focusing on the fact that we'd found someone claiming to be Sarah Chen who exhibited signs of severe psychological disturbance and possible drug intoxication. The search team found nothing. No trace of Sarah Chen, no evidence of our encounter except for some disturbed vegetation where we'd left the trail. Even the water bottle we'd photographed was gone. But they did find something else. 3 miles further up the trail, near the actual Charlie's Bunyan overlook, they discovered Sarah Chen's body. She'd apparently fallen from the rocky outcrop sometime during the afternoon, suffering injuries that would have killed her instantly. The medical examiner estimated time of death at approximately 2 p.m., 4 hours before we'd encountered the thing that wore her face. The official report listed Sarah Chen's death as an accidental fall during a solo hike. The case was closed within a week, but I knew better. I spent hours researching the history of that section of trail, digging through old incident reports and local folklore. What I found chilled me to the bone. The stretch of forest where we'd encountered the Sarah thing had a history dating back to the Cherokee. They'd called it a place where hungry spirits dwelt, entities that could take the form of the recently dead and use those shapes to lure the living to their doom. The early European settlers had their own names for such creatures: skinwalkers, doppelgangers, things that should not be. The Park Service records, when I knew what to look for, showed a pattern of disappearances and strange encounters in that area going back to the park's founding. Marcus transferred to a desk job in Nashville a month later. He never talked about what we'd seen, but I caught him staring at visitors' photos sometimes, studying faces with the intensity of someone who could never again take human appearance for granted. As for me, I stayed on in the Smokies. Someone had to. Someone who knew what was really out there in the dark spaces between the marked trails. I started carrying different equipment: iron filings, salt, a silver cross my grandmother had given me. The other rangers thought I'd gotten religion after my traumatic experience. If only they knew. The thing is, Sarah Chen wasn't the last case like this. Once you know what to look for, you start seeing the patterns. The disappearances that don't quite make sense. The hikers found dead in places they couldn't have reached. The families who report that their loved ones came back from the mountains, different. Last month we had another case. A missing hiker named Michael Torres. We found him 3 days later, sitting by a stream, claiming he'd gotten lost but showing no signs of exposure or dehydration. He seemed normal at first, but something in his eyes reminded me of that terrible smile. His family took him home, grateful and relieved. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the Nashville police. Michael Torres's neighbors had reported strange sounds coming from his apartment. When they broke down the door, they found evidence of something that the detective wouldn't discuss over the phone, but he asked specifically about Michael's mental state when we'd found him. I told him that Michael had seemed fine, perfectly normal. What else could I say? That we'd probably sent something wearing Michael Torres's face home to his unsuspecting family. That somewhere in the mountains, the real Michael Torres was probably feeding whatever had taken his place. The worst part is the dreams. Every night I see Sarah Chen's face as it was when we first found her. Normal, human, frightened. But then it shifts into that horrible smile, and I hear her voice saying, "I want to show you something wonderful." And sometimes in the depths of those nightmares, I find myself following her deeper into the forest, eager to see what wonders await in the hungry dark between the trees. I'm 35 now, and I've been a park ranger at Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 13 years. The Sarah Chen case happened during the fall of 2023, and it still haunts me. But it taught me something important about my job, about the responsibility I bear as a guardian of these mountains. There are things in the wilderness that the guidebooks don't mention, dangers that can't be marked on trail maps, and there are missing persons cases that should stay missing for the sake of everyone involved. When hikers ask me about the safest trails, I give them the standard recommendations. But when they ask about the Charlie's Bunyan Trail, I always suggest they choose a different route. I tell them the views aren't as good as the pictures make them seem. It's a small lie, one I can live with. Because the alternative, telling them the truth about what waits in those shadows, would be worse than any nightmare I've ever had. The mountains keep their secrets, and some secrets are meant to stay buried. But every time I patrol that section of trail, every time I pass the place where we found the thing wearing Sarah Chen's face, I remember that somewhere in these ancient hills, hungry spirits are still waiting, and they're always patient enough to wait for the next missing person report to come in. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 42 years old. I've been a park ranger at Olympic National Park for 18 years. This happened during the fall of 2023, when the missing person case of Emma Chen turned into something that still haunts me. The radio crackled to life at 4:47 p.m., just as the October sun was beginning its early descent behind the towering Douglas firs. I was finishing my afternoon patrol of the Ho River Trail when dispatch called. "Ranger Williams, we have a missing person report. 26-year-old female Emma Chen failed to return from a day hike on the Upper Bogachil Trail. Last seen this morning at 7 a.m. at the trailhead. Over." I keyed my radio, already turning my truck toward the Bogachil area. "Copy that, dispatch, ETA 15 minutes. Any other details on the missing person?" Solo hiker, experienced according to her permit application, had camping gear for overnight stay if needed. Boyfriend reported her missing when she didn't check in via satellite communicator as planned at 4 p.m. The Upper Bogachil was familiar territory, dense old-growth forest that could swallow someone whole if they strayed from the marked trail. During fall, the understory became a maze of fallen logs and dying ferns, perfect for getting turned around. But something about this call felt different. Maybe it was the way the forest had gone eerily quiet during my afternoon rounds, or how my K9 partner Ranger, a German Shepherd with 8 years of search and rescue experience, had been acting skittish all day, whining and refusing to enter certain sections of trail we'd walked hundreds of times before. I reached the Bogachil trailhead as dusk was settling into the valley like a heavy blanket. Emma's blue Subaru sat alone in the gravel lot, covered in morning dew that should have evaporated hours ago. The temperature was dropping fast, another unseasonably cold October evening that had locals talking about an early winter. I grabbed my pack, loaded with emergency supplies, first aid kit, and communication gear. Ranger bounded out of the truck but immediately began pacing nervously, his nose working the air. He'd found hundreds of lost hikers over the years, but I'd never seen him this agitated before starting a search. "What is it, boy?" I knelt down and ran my hand through his thick coat. His muscles were tense, ears swiveling at sounds I couldn't hear. The trailhead register showed Emma had signed in at 6:52 a.m., listing her intended route as the Bogachil River Trail to the first shelter, approximately 8 miles round trip. Her handwriting was neat, confident. The kind of person who planned her hikes carefully. I keyed my radio to check in with search coordination. "Dispatch, this is Williams at the Bogachil trailhead. Beginning initial search of primary route. We'll report progress every 30 minutes. "Copy, Williams. Be advised Weather Service is calling for fog and possible freezing rain after sunset. Additional search teams mobilizing if needed." The trail began as a well-maintained path through second-growth forest, but within a mile it would enter the dense primeval rainforest where ancient trees created a canopy so thick that full daylight resembled twilight. I clicked on my headlamp even though I could still see without it, a habit that had saved my life more than once during night searches. Ranger took point, nose to the ground, but his usual enthusiasm was replaced by cautious, almost reluctant movement forward. Every few yards he'd stop and look back at me, as if asking whether we really needed to continue. The first mile revealed nothing unusual. The trail was damp but firm, showing boot prints from several hikers over the past few days. I photographed the clearest prints with my phone, a women's size 8 hiking boot with an aggressive tread pattern that could belong to Emma. As we pushed deeper into the old growth, the forest changed. The air grew thick and heavy, carrying scents of decay and something else. Something wrong that I couldn't identify. Moss hung from branches like funeral shrouds, and the few remaining patches of dying ferns rustled without any wind to move them. At the 2-mile mark, I found the first sign. Emma's water bottle lay beside the trail, still half full. I pulled on gloves and picked it up carefully, noting that it was positioned too neatly, placed rather than dropped. The cap was screwed on tight. If she'd been drinking and dropped it, the cap would likely be loose or off entirely. Ranger whined and backed away from the water bottle, hackles raised. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, Williams. Found possible evidence at mile marker 2. Water bottle matching description of missing person's gear. Continuing search." "Copy, Williams. Please mark location with GPS coordinates." As I recorded the coordinates, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The boot prints I'd been following simply stopped. Not gradually faded or became unclear. They stopped abruptly in the middle of the trail, as if Emma had simply vanished mid-step. I circled the area carefully, looking for signs she'd left the trail. Ranger refused to approach the spot where the prints ended, instead circling at a distance with his tail tucked between his legs. "Easy, boy. What's got you spooked?" That's when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong in any forest. A low rhythmic clicking like someone rapidly tapping their fingernails against wood. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the massive tree trunks. The clicking stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat. Even the constant drip of moisture from the canopy had ceased. I pulled out my flashlight and swept the beam through the trees on both sides of the trail. The light revealed nothing but endless columns of bark and shadow, but I had the overwhelming sensation of being watched by something that was very good at staying hidden. "Emma," I called out, my voice swallowed by the forest. "Emma Chen, if you can hear me, please respond." No answer. But as my call faded, I heard something that froze my blood. A perfect mimicry of my own voice echoing back from deeper in the forest. "Emma Chen, if you can hear me, please respond." Ranger began growling, a deep rumble that meant serious threat. In all our years together, I'd only heard that growl when we'd encountered a mother bear protecting cubs. I keyed my radio with shaking hands. "Dispatch Williams. Requesting immediate backup at my location." "Something's not right out here," Static answered me. I checked the radio, full battery, all connections secure. I tried again. Nothing but white noise. The clicking sound resumed, closer this time. Much closer. I drew my service weapon and clicked off the safety, something I'd only had to do twice in 18 years, both times involving aggressive wildlife. But this didn't feel like wildlife. This felt like something that understood humans well enough to mimic them. "Let's go, Ranger," I whispered. "We're getting out of here." But as I turned to head back toward the trailhead, Ranger suddenly bolted forward into the forest, barking frantically. His search and rescue training had kicked in. He'd found something. I had no choice but to follow, crashing through the undergrowth as branches tore at my uniform and spider webs caught across my face. Ranger's barks grew more urgent, more desperate. I found him 50 yards off the trail, pawing at the base of a massive cedar tree. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw what had him so agitated. Emma's backpack hung from a branch 12 feet off the ground, far higher than any human could reach without climbing equipment. But there were no scratch marks on the bark, no signs that anyone had climbed the tree. The pack simply hung there as if it had been placed by something that could fly. More disturbing was what lay at the base of the tree. Emma's hiking boots, placed side by side with military precision. Her socks were still inside them, as if she'd simply stepped out of them and disappeared. I aimed my flashlight upward, following the massive trunk into the canopy. That's when I saw her. Emma Chen sat on a branch 30 feet above me, perfectly balanced with no climbing gear, no rope. Nothing to explain how she'd gotten there. She was facing away from me, completely motionless, still wearing her hiking clothes. "Emma," I shouted. "Emma, can you hear me? Are you injured?" She didn't respond, didn't move, didn't even seem to be breathing. I pulled out my backup radio, a handheld unit I carried for emergencies. It crackled to life immediately. "Dispatch, this is Williams. Found the missing person. Requesting immediate medical evacuation team with technical rescue capability. Subject is approximately 30 feet up a tree and unresponsive." "Copy, Williams. Help is en route. Can you determine the subject's condition?" I looked up again. Emma had turned around. Her face was wrong. Not injured. Wrong. Her features were slightly too sharp, her eyes reflecting my flashlight beam like an animal's. When she smiled, I saw too many teeth. I started to speak into the radio, then stopped. "How do you explain to dispatch that the person you found isn't quite human anymore?" Emma Thing began to climb down the tree, moving with inhuman grace and speed. Her fingers seemed to stick to the bark without any visible effort, and she descended head first like some kind of giant spider. Ranger was barking hysterically now, but he wouldn't approach the tree. His instincts were screaming that whatever was coming down wasn't the person we'd been sent to find. Emma Thing dropped the last 10 feet and landed in a crouch that no human spine could survive. When she stood up, I realized she was taller than she should be, stretched somehow as if someone had pulled her like taffy. "Thank you for finding me," she said. And her voice was exactly right, except for the fact that her lips didn't quite match the words. "I've been waiting for someone to come." I kept my weapon trained on her while backing toward the trail. "Emma, I'm Ranger Williams with the National Park Service. We're here to help you. Are you injured? Do you remember what happened?" She tilted her head at an angle that would have broken a normal person's neck. "I remember everything. The hiking, the getting lost, the finding." Her smile widened. "The taking." That's when I noticed the smell, the scent of deep forest decay that I'd detected earlier, but concentrated now, almost overwhelming. It was coming from her. "Who took you, Emma? Where have you been?" "Not took," she said, taking a step closer. "Traded. The hungry one needed a skin to wear, and Emma was so tired of hiking alone." Ranger's barking changed pitch, becoming something I'd never heard before. Pure terror. The kind of sound animals make when they know they're about to die. I keyed my radio while keeping my eyes on Emma Thing. "Dispatch, cancel medical evacuation, requesting immediate law enforcement backup. Armed and dangerous situation." Emma Thing laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "They can't help you. They can't even hear you." She gestured to the radio in my hand. "Nothing works right anymore. Not since it woke up." As if to prove her point, my radio crackled with static and died. The LED display went dark. "What are you?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I knew the answer. My grandmother had told me stories when I was young, Maka legends about the Wendigo, cannibalistic spirits that could take human form. I'd always assumed they were just stories meant to keep children from wandering into the forest alone. "Hungry," Emma Thing replied. "So very hungry, and you smell like fear and desperation. My favorite flavors." She began to change as I watched, her features becoming more angular, more predatory. Her fingers elongated into claws, and when she opened her mouth, I saw rows of needle-sharp teeth designed for tearing flesh. I fired 3 shots, center mass. The bullets hit her chest and passed through without slowing her down, leaving holes that leaked black ichor instead of blood. Emma Thing laughed again and lunged forward with inhuman speed. I threw myself sideways, crashing into a fallen log as claws raked the air where my head had been. Ranger was beside me instantly, placing himself between me and the creature. "Run!" I shouted to him, but he held his ground, snarling and snapping at the thing that wore Emma's face. The Wendigo, because that's what it was, I was certain now, swatted at Ranger with casual contempt. Its claws caught him across the shoulder, sending him tumbling into the undergrowth with a yelp of pain. I rolled behind the log and tried to think. Bullets wouldn't stop it. My radio was dead. I was miles from the nearest help, and darkness was falling fast. Then I remembered something else from my grandmother's stories. Fire. The Wendigo feared fire above all else. I grabbed the emergency flare from my pack and pulled the cap. The magnesium igniter hissed to life, bathing the forest in hellish red light. The Emma Thing recoiled with a shriek that sounded like metal tearing. It scrambled backward, covering its eyes with clawed hands. "Stay back," I warned, holding the flare out like a weapon. "I know what you are." "Clever little Ranger," it hissed. "But flares don't burn forever." It was right. I had maybe 5 minutes before the flare died, and then I'd be defenseless in the dark with a creature that could see perfectly and moved faster than any human. I started backing toward the trail, keeping the flare between us. The Wendigo followed at a distance just outside the circle of light, its glowing eyes tracking my every movement. Ranger limped out of the undergrowth, blood matting his shoulder, but still mobile. He stayed close to my side, growling warnings whenever the Wendigo tried to circle around us. "That's not Emma anymore," I told him quietly. "Whatever happened to the real Emma, this thing is wearing her skin." We reached the main trail, and I turned toward the trailhead. moving as fast as I dared while keeping the flare aimed at our pursuer. The Wendigo moved through the trees parallel to the trail, sometimes visible, sometimes just a suggestion of movement in the shadows. The flare was burning down, its light growing dimmer. I had maybe 2 minutes left. That's when I heard the voices. "Mike! Mike Williams! Where are you?" Flashlight beams cut through the forest ahead. The backup I'd requested was finally arriving. I nearly wept with relief. "Here," I shouted. "I'm here, but stay back. Dangerous situation." 3 rangers emerged from the gloom. Sarah Davis, my supervisor, and 2 others I didn't recognize immediately in the dark. They were armed and moving in tactical formation. "Williams, report," Sarah called out. "What's your status?" "Found the missing person," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But it's not her anymore. Something's taken her form. It's some kind of predator, possibly a Wendigo based on—" I stopped. All 3 rangers were staring at me with expressions of concern, but not the kind you'd expect from people hearing about a supernatural threat. They looked at me like I was having a breakdown. "Mike," Sarah said gently. "We found Emma Chen 2 hours ago. She was at the Falls Creek trailhead about 5 miles south of here. Dehydrated and hypothermic, but alive. She got turned around in the fog this morning and ended up on the wrong trail system entirely." I looked back at where the Wendigo had been. Nothing there but trees and shadows. But I found her backpack, her boots. She was in the tree, and then she changed. Sarah approached slowly, the way you approach someone who might be dangerous. "Mike, we found you talking to a tree. You were having what appeared to be a full conversation with something that wasn't there, and you fired your weapon into empty forest." The flare in my hand guttered out, plunging us into the harsh white light of LED flashlights. I looked around wildly, trying to find some trace of what I'd experienced. "Check my radio," I said desperately. It went dead, and Ranger, look at Ranger's shoulder. The thing clawed him. Sarah examined my radio. It was working perfectly. She keyed it, and dispatch responded immediately. One of the other Rangers knelt beside Ranger and examined his shoulder with a flashlight. "No injuries visible, some matted fur, but that could be from normal brush contact." "This is impossible," I whispered. "I saw it. I fought it. The Wendigo was wearing Emma's skin." "Mike," Sarah said quietly, "I need you to hand over your weapon and come with us. You've been out here for 6 hours. The temperature's dropped below freezing, and you show signs of severe hypothermia. Confusion, hallucinations, aggressive behavior. These are all symptoms." I looked at my watch. It read 11:43 p.m. But that couldn't be right. I'd started my search at sunset, around 6 p.m. I'd only been in the forest for an hour or 2 at most. "What day is it?" I asked. "Thursday, October 19th, Sarah replied. "You've been missing for 2 days, Mike. We've had search teams looking for you since Tuesday night when you failed to return from your patrol." The world spun around me. 2 days? I remembered everything so clearly. The radio call, finding Emma's water bottle, the chase through the forest. But if Emma had been found safe 2 days ago— "The real Emma," I said slowly. Is she okay? Really okay?" "She's fine. Treated for exposure and released. She's been worried about you, actually. Kept asking if the ranger who was supposed to help her had been found." I let Sarah take my weapon and guide me back toward the vehicles. But as we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the trees. And when I glanced back one final time, I could have sworn I saw a figure standing exactly where I'd first encountered the Emma thing. It waved at me. The official report listed my experience as severe hypothermia-induced psychosis, complicated by exhaustion and dehydration. I spent a week in the hospital and another month on administrative leave, while department psychologists evaluated my fitness for duty. They cleared me to return to work with a notation that I should avoid solo patrols in extreme weather conditions. My service record, which had been spotless for 18 years, now carried a flag for psychological episode. I never told anyone about the dreams that started after my return. Dreams where I'm walking through the Olympic rainforest and I hear my own voice calling from the trees, beckoning other rangers deeper into the shadows. Dreams where I see myself from outside, watching as I lead unsuspecting colleagues toward something hungry that waits in the canopy. The real Emma Chen sent me a thank you card, which I keep in my desk drawer. Her handwriting is exactly what I remember from that night. Neat, confident. But sometimes when I'm working late and the office is empty, I swear the writing changes when I'm not looking directly at it. Instead of, "Thank you for trying to help," it reads, "Thank you for the skin." Ranger never fully recovered from whatever happened to us in those missing 2 days. He retired early from search and rescue work, unable to track lost hikers without becoming agitated and confused. He spends most of his time now lying by the fireplace, but sometimes he'll stand at the window and growl at the forest, as if he can see something moving in the trees that I can't. I still work the missing person cases. It's my job, and I'm good at it. But now, every time I head into the backcountry to search for someone who didn't come home, I carry more flares than regulation requires. And I never, ever work alone after dark, because I know that somewhere in the deep woods of Olympic National Park, something is still wearing Emma Chen's face, waiting patiently for the next lone hiker to lose their way. Something that has learned to mimic human voices perfectly, including mine. And sometimes late at night when the wind is blowing through the Douglas firs, I hear it practicing. "Emma Chen, if you can hear me, please respond." The voice is exactly right. Every inflection, every note of concern and authority. It's learned to be the perfect park ranger, ready to guide lost hikers away from safety and toward something that's been hungry for far too long. I know because I taught it how. Last week, I found a water bottle beside the Ho River Trail, placed too neatly to have been dropped. Inside was a note written in my own handwriting. "Thank you for the lessons. The new skin fits perfectly." I burned the note and didn't report the incident. What would be the point? Who would believe me? But I know that soon, very soon, I'll get another missing person call. And when I arrive at the trailhead, I'll find my own truck already parked there, and my own voice will echo from the forest, calling out with perfect ranger protocol as it leads another victim into the trees. The Wendigo doesn't just take skins anymore. It takes lives. It takes identities. And sometimes, when it gets really hungry, it takes the people whose job it is to save others. I should probably quit. Find a nice, safe job in a city somewhere, far from any forest. But I can't abandon my post because as long as I'm here, I might be able to warn someone. I might be able to save just one more person from walking into those trees and never coming back as themselves, even if it means that someday I'll have to face the thing that's wearing my face and using my voice to lure the innocent to their doom, even if it means that someday I'll have to figure out which one of us is real. My name is Michael Williams and I am 34 years old. I've been a park ranger at Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 11 years. This happened during the fall of 2023, when the missing person case of Sarah Chen turned into something that still haunts me every time I hear whistling in the wind. The call came in at 4:47 p.m. on October 15th, just as the autumn sun was beginning its rapid descent behind the ridge line. I was finishing up my patrol near Cataract Falls when dispatch crackled through my radio with that tone every ranger dreads. Missing person, family separated, child involved. "Ranger Williams, we have a code yellow at Cataract Falls trailhead. 8-year-old Sarah Chen, last seen wearing a red jacket and blue jeans. Family reports she was about 50 yards ahead on the trail when they lost sight of her around the bend near Marker 7. I acknowledged and immediately changed course, my boots finding familiar purchase on the well-worn trail. 11 years of experience had taught me that the first few hours were critical, especially with a child, especially this late in the day. The temperature would drop 20 degrees once full darkness hit, and these October nights in the Smokies could kill an unprepared kid in under 4 hours. The Chens were waiting at the trailhead when I arrived. Father David, Mother Lynn, and teenage son Marcus. The kind of family that came prepared with proper hiking boots and layers, which made Sarah's disappearance even more concerning. Prepared families don't lose kids. "She was right there," Lin Chen kept repeating, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. She was singing that song she learned at school, skipping ahead like she always does. When we came around the bend, she was just gone. I pulled out my incident report form and began the standard questions, but something felt off about their answers. David kept glancing toward the forest like he was expecting something to emerge from the tree line. Marcus hadn't said a word, just stood there with his hands shoved deep in his pockets, shoulders hunched. "What song was she singing?" I asked, more to establish timeline than anything else. "Some nursery rhyme about whistling," Lynn said, her voice wavering. She'd been humming it all day, something about following the whistle home. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I'd never heard of a nursery rhyme like that, and I had 2 young nieces who sang every kid's song imaginable. But I filed the detail away and focused on the immediate search protocol. "I'm calling in additional personnel," I told them. "We'll have search and rescue here within 30 minutes. In the meantime, I need you to stay exactly here at the trailhead. If Sarah finds her way back, this is where she'll come." My radio crackled as I called it in. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Williams. I need search and rescue team 2 at Cataract Falls Trailhead. Missing child, 8 years old. Also requesting K9 unit if available." "Copy that, Williams. Team 2 is en route. ETA 25 minutes. K9 unit is finishing up a search near Elkmont. Might be delayed." I started up the trail alone, following standard search protocol. Stay on the main path, call out every 30 seconds, mark any sign of passage. The Cataract Falls Trail was a popular day hike, wide and well-maintained for the first mile before it narrowed near the actual falls. Plenty of places for a kid to wander off, but also plenty of opportunities for her to hear me calling and respond. "Sarah! Sarah Chen!" My voice echoed off the rock faces. "Sarah, my name is Ranger Mike. Your parents are looking for you." The forest was too quiet. That was the first thing that really bothered me. October in the Smokies should be alive with the rustle of migrating birds, the chatter of squirrels preparing for winter, the occasional snap of a deer moving through the underbrush. Instead, I heard only my own footsteps and the distant sound of water cascading over rocks. I reached trail marker 7, where the family had last seen Sarah. The path curved sharply to the right around a massive boulder, creating a blind spot that lasted maybe 20 yards before opening up again. Standard procedure would be to check all the obvious places first, behind the boulder, down by the creek, up on the small outcropping of rocks that kids always seemed drawn to climb. That's when I heard it. A faint whistling, melodic and rhythmic, coming from somewhere deeper in the forest. Not human, but not quite animal either. Something in between. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Williams. I'm hearing what might be audio contact near marker 7. Investigating." "Copy that. Be advised, Team 2 is 10 minutes out." I left the main trail and pushed through the undergrowth toward the sound. The whistling was clearer now, definitely a melody, rising and falling in a pattern that seemed almost hypnotic. As I got closer, I could make out what might have been words, though they weren't in any language I recognized. The sound led me to a game trail, barely visible and heading steadily uphill toward the ridge. Fresh, disturbed leaves showed recent passage, and caught on a thorn bush about 3 feet off the ground. I found a small piece of red fabric. "Sarah," I called again. "Sarah, if you can hear me, stay where you are. I'm coming to help you." The whistling stopped. The silence that followed was so complete it made my ears ring. No birds, no insects, no wind through the leaves. Even the distant sound of the falls seemed muted. I stood perfectly still listening, and that's when I heard it. A small voice, very faint, calling back. "Ranger Mike, I'm scared." My training kicked in immediately. I followed the voice up the game trail, moving as quickly as I dared while calling out reassurances. "I'm coming, Sarah. You're doing great. Just keep talking to me." "I can't find my mommy and daddy." Her voice came again, closer now but still strangely muffled. "The nice lady said she'd help me find them, but now I can't find her either." I froze. Nice lady? The family hadn't mentioned anyone else on the trail. "Sarah, what nice lady? Can you describe her for me?" No answer. "Sarah?" I pressed forward, pushing through a thick stand of rhododendron, and emerged into a small clearing I'd never seen before despite years of patrolling these trails. In the center stood a massive dead oak, its bare branches reaching toward the darkening sky like gnarled fingers. And there was Sarah Chen, sitting on a fallen log about 20 feet from the tree, facing away from me. She was perfectly still, her small frame silhouetted against the pale bark of the oak. "Sarah?" I approached slowly, relief flooding through me. "Sarah, it's Ranger Mike. Your parents are worried about you." She didn't turn around. I circled to face her, and what I saw made my blood turn to ice water. Sarah's eyes were completely white. Pupils rolled back until only the sclera showed. Her mouth was open, and from her throat came that same melodic whistling I'd been following, though her lips weren't moving. "Sarah?" I reached for my radio with shaking hands. "Sarah, can you hear me?" Her head turned toward me with a motion too smooth, too controlled for a frightened 8-year-old. When she spoke, her voice was layered, as if multiple people were speaking in perfect unison. "She's sleeping now, dreaming such wonderful dreams." I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Williams. I have eyes on the missing child, but I need immediate medical response. Possible head trauma or neurological event. Static." I looked at my radio. Full battery, strong signal indicator, but nothing but white noise when I tried to transmit. "The songs are so beautiful here," Sarah said in that terrible multi-voice. "She wants to stay and listen. They all want to stay and listen. Sarah, I'm going to help you stand up, okay? We're going to walk back to your parents." I approached slowly, hands visible, using the voice I'd learned in crisis intervention training. But as I got closer, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Sarah's feet weren't touching the ground. She was sitting on the log, but her legs dangled several inches above the forest floor. "The nice lady taught her such a pretty song," Sarah continued. "Would you like to hear it, Ranger Mike?" She began to whistle, and the sound cut through me like broken glass. It was the same melody I'd followed into the forest, but hearing it up close, I could tell it wasn't meant for human throats. The notes bent and twisted in ways that hurt to process, creating harmonics that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my bones. Around us, the forest began to change. The dead oak's branches started to sway despite the complete absence of wind. Shadows deepened and stretched in directions that didn't match the dying light. And from somewhere in the darkness beyond the clearing, I heard the sound of children laughing. "Sarah, we need to leave now." I stepped forward and reached for her arm. The moment my fingers made contact, images flooded my mind. I saw Sarah following the whistling into the forest, but she wasn't alone. A tall figure walked beside her, keeping pace with her small steps. The figure wore a tattered dress that might have once been white, and where its face should have been was only smooth, pale skin, broken by a mouth that never stopped whistling. I saw other children too, dozens of them, following that same hypnotic melody deeper into the forest. They walked in a line, hand in hand, their eyes rolled back white, their mouths hanging open. Some wore clothes from decades past, others more recent, all of them whistling that terrible song. I jerked my hand back and the visions stopped, but Sarah's head had turned completely around to face me, her neck twisted at an impossible angle. "She doesn't want to go back," all those voices said through her mouth. "None of them want to go back. The lady's songs are so much prettier than the world above." Behind Sarah, the dead oak began to crack and groan. Its massive trunk was splitting open, revealing a hollow interior that descended far deeper than should have been possible. The sound of children's laughter was coming from inside, echoing up from depths that belonged more to cave systems than tree trunks. "You can come too, Ranger Mike," Sarah said, her head still facing backward. "You've been listening for so long, haven't you heard her calling?" And the horrible thing was, I had. Now that she mentioned it, I realized I'd been hearing that faint whistling for weeks during my patrols. I'd always dismissed it as wind through the trees, but now I understood it had been something else entirely. Something calling to me, trying to draw me deeper into the forest. "Who is she?" I managed to ask. "She's been here so long," Sarah replied. "Since before the park, before the trails, before the rangers. She remembers when this was all wilderness, when children who wandered too far from their villages simply disappeared. She's so lonely, Ranger Mike. That's why she sings. That's why she teaches the children her songs. The hollow in the oak was growing larger, and I could see movement in the darkness below. Pale shapes climbing upward, reaching toward the surface. More children, I realized, the ones who had answered her call over the years, maybe the decades. I had to make a choice. My training said to extract the victim and call for backup, but my radio was dead, and Sarah wasn't exactly a victim anymore. She was something else now. Something that wore her face but spoke with a dozen voices and sat suspended in midair. The families, I said. Their parents, their siblings. Don't you remember being loved? For just a moment, Sarah's head twisted back to its normal position. Her eyes rolled down, pupils contracting in the fading light, and when she spoke, it was with her own 8-year-old voice. Ranger Mike? Where am I? I want my mommy. But the moment lasted only seconds before her eyes rolled back again and the multi-voice returned. Love fades, it said. Songs are forever. The children understand this now. They sing with her in the deep places, and their voices make such beautiful harmony. The shapes in the hollow were getting closer to the surface. I could see their faces now. Children of all ages, their skin pale as moonlight, their mouths open in eternal song. And climbing among them was something else, something tall and wrong that might have once been human. I made my decision. I lunged forward and grabbed Sarah around the waist, pulling her off the log. She was impossibly light, as if most of her substance had already been drained away, and when I lifted her, she began to shriek, not with her own voice, but with the sound of wind through dead branches. The dead oak exploded outward, showering us with rotten wood and something that smelled like centuries of decay. The tall figure erupted from the hollow, rising to its full height, and I finally saw the whistler clearly. She might have been beautiful once in the way that ancient things sometimes retain echoes of their original form, but her face was a smooth expanse of pale skin, broken only by that terrible mouth, which opened far wider than any human mouth should. Her hair hung in long gray strings, and her tattered dress moved independently of any wind. When she saw me holding Sarah, she opened her mouth and released a whistle so piercing it felt like ice picks driven into my skull. All around the clearing, the forest came alive with answering calls. Dozens of children's voices, all whistling that same melody, all converging on our location. I ran. Sarah was getting heavier in my arms, as if whatever force had been keeping her weightless was losing its hold. She thrashed and fought, her small fists pounding against my chest, while that awful multi-voice screamed accusations and threats. You don't understand. The songs are everything. The songs are eternal. You're taking her away from paradise. Behind us, I could hear the whistler giving chase, her feet never quite touching the ground as she glided between the trees. Her voice rose in a complex melody that made the shadows reach for us like grasping hands. I burst through the rhododendron thicket and back onto the game trail, my radio crackling suddenly to life. Williams! Williams, respond! Your last transmission was garbled. What's your status? Dispatch. I gasped into the radio while stumbling down the trail. I have the missing child, but we need immediate extraction. Something's wrong up here. Something. The transmission cut to static again as Sarah's whistling intensified. She'd gone rigid in my arms, her back arching as that impossible sound poured from her throat. I could see the main trail ahead, and beyond it the glow of emergency lights. Search and rescue had arrived, and I could hear voices calling Sarah's name. Normal human voices that sounded like salvation after the supernatural horror of the clearing. But the whistler wasn't giving up. I could feel her presence behind us, could hear her song growing stronger, more insistent. Sarah's struggles were weakening, and I realized with growing terror that whatever part of her had been speaking to me in her own voice was fading fast. Fight it, Sarah, I told her. Think about your mom and dad. Think about Marcus, they're waiting for you. Can't hear them anymore, she whispered in her real voice. The lady's song is too loud. It's too beautiful. I want to go back. No, you don't. You want to go home. You want to see your family. I stumbled onto the main trail just as the search and rescue team rounded the bend. Their powerful LED flashlights cut through the growing darkness, and when the beams hit us, Sarah suddenly went completely limp. "Got her," I called out. "Medical attention needed." The team rushed forward. Jake Morrison and Helen Stewart, both paramedics as well as rangers. They immediately began assessing Sarah while I radioed the all clear to dispatch. "Pupil response is normal," Helen reported. "No obvious trauma, but she's hypothermic and unresponsive to verbal stimuli." "How long was she missing?" Jake asked while wrapping Sarah in a thermal blanket. "About 2 hours," I said, though it felt like much longer. "Found her about a quarter-mile off trail near an old oak." As we prepared to move Sarah back to the trailhead, I glanced over my shoulder toward the forest. The Whistler was there, just visible between the trees, her pale form barely distinguishable from the mist that was beginning to rise from the cooling ground. She watched us go, and though I couldn't see her expression, I could feel her rage like a physical weight. But she didn't follow us onto the main trail. Whatever power she held seemed confined to the deeper wilderness, to the places where the old darkness still held sway. The reunion with Sarah's family was everything you'd expect. Tears, relief, frantic questions about where she'd been and whether she was hurt. Sarah herself seemed confused and disoriented, claiming she didn't remember anything after leaving the trail. The doctors at the hospital would later attribute this to hypothermia and stress, but I knew better. I filed my report as a standard missing child case. Disoriented juvenile found off trail, no signs of foul play. Probable cause was curiosity about forest sounds leading to temporary displacement. I didn't mention the clearing, the dead oak, or the creature that called children to their doom with impossible songs. Who would believe it? But I couldn't forget it. And over the following weeks, I found myself researching the history of disappearances in the Smokies. What I found made my blood run cold. Going back to the 1800s, there were records of children vanishing near Cataract Falls. Always during the fall months, always late in the day, always involving reports of strange music heard in the forest. The pattern was consistent. A child would wander off a trail, their family would report hearing whistling or singing, and the child would never be found. Until now, Sarah Chen was the first child to be recovered alive from whatever force haunted those woods, and I began to understand why. Every other family had tried to search on their own, or had waited for morning to call for help. I'd been in the right place at the right time, with the right training and equipment to find her before the Whistler could complete whatever ritual she used to steal children away forever. But my victory felt hollow when I realized the full scope of what I was dealing with. In my research, I'd found references to Native American legends about a spirit that lived in the deep forests, a creature that had once been human but had been transformed by grief and isolation into something that fed on innocence. The Cherokee had called her the Nimvriselu, the Corn Mother's shadow, and had warned their children never to follow strange music into the woods. The federal government had built a national park on top of her hunting ground, brought millions of visitors into her territory, and provided her with a steady stream of potential victims for decades. I started patrolling the Cataract Falls area more frequently, especially during the late afternoon hours when families with children were most likely to be on the trails. I learned to recognize the signs: the unnatural quiet, the faint whistling carried on wind that didn't exist, the way shadows seemed to reach toward the trail despite the sun's position. And I began to understand that Sarah's rescue had made me a target. The Whistler knew I could see her, could hear her true voice beneath the musical disguise. More importantly, she knew I could interfere with her hunting. 3 times over the next month, I found myself drawn off the main trails by reports of lost children that turned out to be false alarms. 3 times, I followed that hypnotic melody deeper into the forest, only to realize at the last moment that I was the prey, not the rescuer. She was learning my patterns, studying my responses, looking for a way to add my voice to her eternal choir. The final confrontation came on November 3rd, during the last weeks of tourist season before the winter closure of some park areas. I was doing my evening patrol when I heard children laughing near Marker 7, the same spot where I'd first found sign of Sarah's passage. This time I was ready. I'd spent weeks preparing, researching not just the Whistler's history, but the countermeasures various cultures had developed for dealing with malevolent spirits. I carried iron filings in my pockets, a small mirror blessed by 3 different religious leaders, and most importantly, a digital recorder loaded with recordings of every lullaby and children's song I could find. Because I'd realized something crucial. The Whistler's power lay in her monopoly on music in those woods. She called to children with melodies they'd never heard before, songs that bypassed their conscious minds and spoke directly to some deeper, more primitive part of their brains. But what would happen if they heard familiar music instead? The laughter was coming from the same game trail where I'd tracked Sarah, and as I approached, I could see small figures moving between the trees. Children, maybe a dozen of them, all following that tall, pale shape deeper into the forest. I turned on my recorder and cranked the volume to maximum. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star," rang out through the forest, drowning out the Whistler's melody. "How I wonder what you are." The effect was immediate and dramatic. The children stopped walking and turned toward the sound, confusion replacing the blank compliance on their faces. Several of them began to cry, calling for their parents in voices that sounded beautifully, wonderfully human. The Whistler whirled toward me, her smooth face contorting with rage. When she opened her mouth to sing, what came out was more shriek than melody, a sound of pure fury that sent birds exploding from the trees for miles around, but I was ready for that too. I pulled out the blessed mirror and angled it to catch the last rays of sunlight filtering through the canopy, reflecting the light directly into her face. She recoiled as if I'd struck her with fire, that terrible mouth opening wider than ever as she screamed her frustration. The children were scattering now, running back toward the main trail and their frantic families, guided by the familiar song still playing from my recorder. "Old MacDonald had a farm," the device sang cheerfully. E-I-E-I-O. The Whistler made one last attempt to regain control, her voice rising in a complex harmony that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. But she was fighting a losing battle against "The Wheels on the Bus" and "If You're Happy and You Know It," songs that spoke to joy and home and safety, instead of the dark promises she offered. With a final shriek of defeat, she faded back into the forest, taking her unnatural silence with her. Suddenly, the woods were alive again with the normal sounds of evening. Owls beginning their hunt, small creatures rustling through the underbrush, the distant sound of water flowing over stone. I helped reunite the lost children with their families, filing reports about a group of kids who had wandered off together while playing Follow the Leader. None of them remembered seeing the Whistler, though several mentioned hearing pretty music that had made them want to go exploring. That was 6 months ago, and I haven't heard her song since. I think my little musical intervention taught her that her hunting ground wasn't as secure as she'd believed, that there were people watching for her tricks and willing to fight back. But I know she's still out there, waiting in the deep places where the old darkness lingers. I found evidence of her presence, trees that have died overnight, clearings where nothing will grow, places where even in the middle of summer the temperature drops 10 degrees for no reason. And sometimes, late at night when I'm doing my final patrol, I catch myself listening for that faint whistling in the wind. Part of me wonders what her songs really sound like, what promises they contain, what visions they offer to the children who follow them into the dark. That's the part of me I have to fight every day, because I understand now why Sarah said the ladies' songs were so beautiful. The Whistler offers escape from a world full of pain and fear and disappointment. She promises eternal childhood, eternal music, eternal freedom from the weight of adult responsibilities. And sometimes when I'm dealing with bureaucratic nonsense or budget cuts or tourists who treat the wilderness like their personal playground, that promise sounds almost tempting, almost. But then I remember Sarah Chen's real voice cutting through that multi-toned horror. Remember her saying she wanted her mommy, and I know that whatever the Whistler offers isn't worth the price. So I keep patrolling the Cataract Falls Trail, especially during the late afternoon hours when the light starts to fade and children might be tempted to wander. I carry my recorder loaded with children's songs, my blessed mirror, my iron filings, and the knowledge that some things are worth fighting for. And I listen for the sound of families laughing together, parents calling their children's names with love instead of fear, the normal chaos of human connection that drowns out any supernatural melody, because that's the real music of the forest. Not some ancient predator's hypnotic hunting song, but the sound of people taking care of each other, looking out for each other, refusing to let the darkness win, even when it's whistling such beautiful songs. My name is Michael Williams, and I'm still a park ranger at Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I've learned that some missing person cases never really end. They just teach you what to listen for in the silence between the trees, and remind you that the most important sound you can make is calling someone's name with love, loud enough for them to find their way home.